Good morning to the Upward Bound class this morning. It is the first Sunday in June coming up, and so we just thank you for tuning in, and hope that everybody is doing well, and hope that everybody is has been able to do what they need to be doing this time. Trouble is going on, so we thank you for tuning in. And I want to make just a little bit of announcements. If you haven't got your Sunday school books, you can pick them up in the Christian Life Center as you go through the door. They'll be on the right-hand side there, in the seat there, and just there is a regular Sunday school lesson, teachers editions, and different ones there if you want to pick those up. So we start a new book. We start new chapters in our lesson this week. We start in the book of Proverbs, and so we kind of shifting gears from where we're at in the New Testament, but the Old Testament we take the book of Proverbs is a very, very interesting book. It's a book of Solomon giving advice, and Solomon is giving advice through this book of Proverbs from the experiences he had as king over Israel. So, you know, when Solomon started, when God had picked Solomon to be the king of Israel, God had asked him one question, and if anything that he could have, what would he wish or what would he want? And Solomon mentioned that he would like to have wisdom. And so God gave that to him through his kingship through Israel and the king there, and building a new temple. That, you know, David didn't get to do that, but Solomon did. And Solomon had went to God about all the things from the beginning that he should do. He always took his things to God, and God gave him the answer of what to do, and he built his kingdomship, he built his riches, he got just to having more and more. God really had blessed Solomon through his kingship, and it got to the point that I think a lot happens to even us today when we have everything that we want, everything we ever ask for. Sometimes we get to the point where that we don't need God's answers no more. And Solomon had gotten to that point where he didn't need God's answers anymore, and so he started kind of going the other direction. He started thinking on his own. And through that lifestyle, through the lifestyle that Solomon had there, through the times he first started as king of Israel and built the temple and doing everything that God had asked him to do, and then it come to the point where he decided that all his wealth and stuff had given him the right to do everything, and he started going the other direction. So through the book of Proverbs, Solomon is given words of wisdom and words of advice through the Proverbs for how we should live. And the thing about that, when Solomon had a son, and Solomon wanted to make sure that his son did not follow actually in the latter footsteps of Solomon as his kingship, because as we see this in the book of Proverbs, he'll tell us many, many times that all that stuff became vanity and when he understood that all the riches we need was in God and God himself. So we start, I think, the lesson book. Let me read in our lesson book right now the opening context of that, and kind of get an idea what the lesson book says here. If you got that, you can follow along. But it says the book of Proverbs begins with an invitation and a warning. The invitation comes in the form of a call to the wise. Solomon urged anyone who would listen and hear and obey the call to walk in the path of God's wisdom. And it says wisdom is personified as if she is a woman who calls out in the street, inviting all who will bear hair to come and embrace God's wisdom. There's a warning here as well. Solomon warned of the trouble that awaits any who will not heed the call to life wisely. He turned his attention to his son. His son would need to make up his mind and to walk in God's wisdom, making a decision who would not be easy, since he would encounter evil people who would try to entice him to join them. This is a good lesson for the youngsters today, for the young people to study the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is a great learning tool for young people. And I know it's in the Old Testament, but there's a lot in there that they will face in this day and this time, that in the book of Proverbs that'll help them grow as Christians and grow and understand what God would have us to do. And he said they would try to persuade him that the road they took would be fun. It would involve violence, murder, and theft. Solomon warned that his gang members would eventually have their lives stolen from them. The consequences of rejecting godly truth and wisdom are devastating. Now, Solomon was talking about that to his son in general on the lifestyle that his son should take. And he's telling his son here that even though it looks fun, even though it looks enticing, but the deal is, if it's wrong and if it's involved in violence and against God's laws and murders and theft, it's going to cause you to go down a wrong road that you might not be able to get out of. So we see this when we talk about Solomon. Solomon, let's look at verse 1 if we will. He said, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel. And he said, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equality, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. You know, these 4 verses will sum up a lot of stuff that we see going on today. The instruction of wisdom from God will give people the idea of what justice is and what judgment is and equality is. To give subtlety to the simple, to the young people, to give them knowledge about what's right and about what's wrong. And Brother McGee underlines a couple of things that he's talking about here. And he talks about the first thing is to know wisdom. You know, God gave Solomon wisdom. When he asked him what he wanted, he gave him wisdom. So what is wisdom, he says here? He says wisdom is what is meant by the word wisdom in the Scripture means the ability to use knowledge right. So that's pretty good. I think that what he's pointing out here, a lot of people think that being smart and being educated and knowing all these things about everything is wisdom, but it's not wisdom. It's being smart. You might have an IQ, but then maybe because you have an IQ doesn't mean the fact that you have wisdom to know how to use that IQ. And that's what Solomon is talking about here. The ability to use knowledge the right way. And in this day and time, we don't see that done. We see a lot of times, we see knowledge used the wrong direction. The wrong direction going against God's wisdom, against God's way of doing things, to man's way of doing things. And God in the Scriptures tells us that becomes a foolish man, not a wise man. If you're a man that has got intelligence and you've got schooling and you don't use it in the direction of God, God says in His Word that you're a foolish man. And that's what we see, I think, in this day and time. He says, and to know wisdom, it says to know Jesus. So, if we talk about this, about being Christians, Christian people ought to know wisdom because they know who Jesus is. Wisdom that God gives us is the power to understand who Jesus is by His grace. And he says instruction, the word instruction, appears 26 times in Proverbs. He said the word instruction means you teach by discipline. So even though that we are smart, even though we know a lot of stuff, if we don't use discipline in that teaching power that God has given us, it's not going to turn out to be the right thing. And what's he talking about here when he's talking about the means to teach by discipline? The means to teach by discipline means we need to be teaching by what God would have us to teach. We need to be teaching on what God's laws are, what the Bible teaches to have us to do. And that's what he's talking about here by teaching by discipline. Instruction is to teach by discipline. God, our Heavenly Father, is excellent at teaching in that way. I think I've learned most, Brother McGee says, when he has taken me to the woodshed. He said the lesson were very impressive. God expects us to use our intelligence, and He expects us to use a great deal of sanctified common sense to go along with that. I think that's pretty good. Sanctified common sense. Now, I've heard about having common sense, but now this is sanctified common sense. Now, what's that mean? That means common sense is from God, not from just anybody. But we can have common sense. We grew up with common sense. The old people that have all these sayings, and the older people, our grandfathers, they always taught us these different sayings, different things, how to use our common sense to do things. But God is saying here, He's talking about our common sense to be sanctified, and that's through Him. Use it through God. And He's talking about in verse 3, He said the word justice. Justice is righteousness. It means the right behavior. So when He's talking about here that we should have the justice, is the behavior that we should. Are we today, out about doing and the right behavior? Are we handling ourselves the right way, the way that God should have us to handle ourselves? Are we behaving right? Right now, there's a lot of people out there that's not behaving right, really, right now. There's a lot of junk going on in all this protesting. They're not behaving like they should behave. They're behaving the way Satan would have them to behave. Judgment. He's talking about judgment. Judgment means that you are to make sound judgment, good judgments. There's a lot of not good judgments being made in things that are going wrong right now. And all this is talking about equality. He said it refers to principle rather than conduct. The child of God is not to put under rules, but we are given great principles in which He should guide us. And this is going to Scripture. Reading Scripture to have God to help us to understand how that we should do these things. What kind of principles should we have? And so that's what Solomon is doing here, what he's talking about in his son, to have these kind of principles and things. And he talks about here in verse 4, he talks about giving subsidy to the simple. He said it means to be wise in what we do. So if you look at these, a lot of these things boils down to how our character is, how to react to things. What do we do? How do we behave? What decisions do we make? How do we handle of those kinds? He says a child of God ought not to act foolishly. If you're a child of God, you shouldn't be acting foolishly. How should we act? We should act in a way that glorifies God. Do we do that all the time? No. But that's what he's saying. And he said, talked about to the young man, knowledge. Knowledge here is information that's useful. Use what knowledge you get. How do you get knowledge? You get knowledge by studying, by reading, by talking to other people that know more about what you're looking for than you do. You gain knowledge from their experience. Is what you do there. So knowledge is the information that you get. When you get that knowledge, he's saying, make it useful. And Solomon is saying all these things, and he's coming back to tell all this, because what happened to him in his latter part of the years, he got to where he wasn't doing none of these things. He wasn't using the wisdom that God gave him the right way. So he didn't take that information that God had told him to do and make it useful. Discretion. What does discretion mean? It means thoughtfulness. He said this for the young man and young people in general who are thoughtless. He said, I am very frank to say that I was very thoughtless, a thoughtless young man, and I confess that I am still that today in a way. It is always a pleasure to find a thoughtful Christian. Somebody that thinks, you know what? in a sense, when you look at this thing, and even I myself, sometimes I don't think things through before I decide to do certain things. And then I'll have some of my brothers and sisters, even in meetings stuff that they have, and I look and see sometimes where that maybe they just took a minute and thought something through and had a better idea or a better decision that could be made. So what he's saying, we need to think, use discretion and be thoughtfulness. Think about what's going on there. Think about what God would have you to do. And Solomon, he got away from that. And in verse 5 he says, a wise man will hear and will increase learning. A man of understanding shall attain unto his counsel. To understand a proverb and the interpretation of the words of the wise and their dark sayings. God has put these great truths in the Bible for us to understand all the words of the wise, and I understand the dark sayings. There are plenty of dark sayings in the Bible, ain't it? There's a lot of things that comes from Satan in the Bible, and the dark things that happen in the Bible he's talking about there. So we should understand how to handle those. It's what he's talking about here. The words of the wise and of the dark things that he's talking about there. And I think we start here in verse 7, it talks about in the Sunday school lesson. This gets into the key part of the book. Solomon says here, it says, to fear the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. How often do we see that today? How often do we see that people despise the wisdom and the instructions of God? Just look out your door and watch the news and you can understand what he's saying right there today. He says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. If you don't fear God, we're not to fear God as a point he's going to strike us down every time we make a mistake. We're to fear God because he's our creator. And he created everything for us and around us. You see, that's where we should fear. We should fear his omnipotence there of who he really is. And one day, at the end, you got to understand, God's going to have the last say in eternity with us. So he's saying here, to fear God is a beginning of knowledge. We'll have a short time on this earth. 60, 70, 80, 90 years. When you get to that point and look backwards, it's not a very long period of time, is it? So, it's hard for me to understand that people today, they despise wisdom and instruction of today. But the part of it is, today is short. Eternity is forever. You see what I mean? Eternity. Where are you going to be in eternity? And when you despise the wisdom and instruction of God, you're going to be in eternity. It's going to be in hell, not heaven. That's a long period of time. He says in verse 9, it says, my son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. And he said, for they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck. What's he saying here to his son? He's saying, just listen to what I have to say. We've all been through that as parents and things about our children, and we want our children to hear what we have to say to them in instructions. Why do we give our kids instructions? We give our kids instructions to make it better for them, don't we? We give our kids instructions sometimes not to go a certain direction because we've seen that direction over the years. We know which direction that they follow there is not going to be a good place for them. So, he's saying to his son here, hear the instruction of your father and forsake not the law of your mother. Always when I was a kid, when my kids were growing up and stuff, I always want to make sure that my kids listen to their mother. Because kids sometimes, especially when they get a little older, they get up on, mama's not big enough to handle me no more. I don't have to listen to her. But let me tell you something. If you got to listen to Dad, if you don't listen to Dad, you're going to be in trouble. Because Dad wants you to listen to Mama. Because your mama, what he's talking about here, your mother, probably has the most wisdom of all in these categories. And so he's saying here, don't forsake the law of thy mother and the teachings of the mother. You need to respect your mother and what she does, because she takes care of you. She's the one that cooks for you, cleans for you, and takes care of you. She is the one that causes the father to be able to go out and work and not have to worry about his kids, because her mother is there to take care of him. So Solomon is looking at that. Hear my instruction, but don't forsake your mother. You see, for they are an ornament of grace upon your head, and the chains upon your neck. God, he says, have mercy on the parents who are not instructing their little ones in the things of God. We look in this day and time, we look at how society is today. And what we see in society today, we see this very, very often, more often than none, of the parents not instructing their kids. They're letting the schools instruct them, they're letting the government instruct them, they're letting other kids instruct them, other places they go instruct them, but they're not instructing them their own. They're letting everything else give their kids instruction but them. And he says to have mercy on the parents who don't do that. And we see that this day and time, the results of that. He said, my son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. So what's he saying here? He's saying here, if the crowds you're running with, and they're having you to do simple things, not to go with them, not to do, don't concede to that none whatsoever. And Brother McGee is a good point here. He says the movement nowadays is in the outside of the home, not inside of the home. And we see that very, very clearly out there this day and time, because a lot of that's changed over the years. And the outside societies took more control over kids instead of us. And that's why, you see, I think, the ratios of kids coming to Christ are getting smaller, all the time, just because of the home and the instruction of the home is talking about here. The temptation outside the home. He says in verse 11, he said, if they say, come with us, let us not lay wait for blood, let us lurk privately for innocent without cause. Let us swallow them up alive as grave and whole, and those that go down into the pit. We shall find all precious substance, and we shall find our houses with spoils. It is so crazy about how these things come about. But it is so crazy about when things are going wrong with our world today. And you come right here, you take these 3 verses. What is Solomon telling the people, telling his son? He's telling them, do not listen to what they're saying when they say, come let us lay wait for blood. Let us look perfectly for innocent without cause. Innocent people. He's saying, let us wait and let's take from innocent people. Let's terrorize innocent people. And he said, let us swallow them up alive as the grave and whole, and those that go down in the pit. Let's destroy them. It's what these guys are telling him that they want to do. What's going on right now? We see innocent people with their businesses destroyed and things stolen from them, and people getting hurt and people getting shot and all that bunch of different stuff. That's what's going on right now. And here we are in the book of Proverbs talking about this same thing that's going on. And he said that we shall find all precious substance. What's that mean? We shall be able to take what we want. And nobody's going to bother us. They take an excuse of a man's life and take it and destroy other people's property and lives. It's an excuse. Is all it is to do what they're doing. A man got done injustice and he died. And that'll be taken care of through the court system. He did deserve what he got. But the family in this whole ordeal, you know what I'm talking about, pleaded with people to quit doing what they're doing. We don't want this to happen. So do they really care about the man that died and the family? If they did, they would quit. But they don't. All they care about is a way to be able to do destruction and people pushing them to do this destruction. It's the kind of world we live in today, that people want to destroy innocent people's lives and their property and then cry and whine if they get arrested for it. That's what Solomon is telling his son. Don't be caught up with these kind of people. Don't be innocent people trying to be caught up in this just for the fun of it, because he's saying here the outcome is not going to be good. He said in verse 14, casting out lot among us, let us all have one purse. Let us all live under the leadership of Christ, under the leadership of that. Let's do right. Let's quit stealing. Let's quit this stuff and do what God would have him to do. In verse 15, he says, my son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. He's talking about don't follow them around. Stay away from them. You ever notice on TV, you know, what time you watch a younger kid that's kind of follows, you know, gang members or bad people around because they're kind of interested to be around them because they feel like it feels big and all that bunch of stuff. And that's kind of what he's talking about. So refrain thy foot. Don't follow them around. Don't go in that path that they're going and separate yourself from them. You know, that's what the Bible very clearly says to do that. It says, wherefore come out from among them. Be ye separate, saith the Lord, in Corinthians 6:17. Be separate from them. It says in verse 16, it says, for their feet run to evil, and make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. It says in verse 18, it says, and they lay wait for their own blood, and lurk privily for their own lives. It says here, it says, Brother McGee says, when you get into that type of thing, it would eventually lead you to your own destruction. That's what it all boils down to. You get tied up in that stuff, and it'll lead to your own destruction. And that's what's going to happen. You will reap your own judgment of that kind of living and that kind of things that you do. The Bible teaches that all the time. You'll reap your own judgment on that. That's why I was talking about a while ago. There's a lot of younger generation kids get involved in all this stuff. They just want to go look and see. They want to get close to it. It's an adrenaline thing for them to be out there to see all that's doing. They might be just a little bit of tad part of it, you know. And not thinking, you know, they're doing much wrong, but they're in the midst of it. And then something happens, the bullets start flying. And some little innocent kid, 12-year-old kid, goes in there, go see what's going on, a little bit of a thrill for him, loses his life. Just because he just wanted to follow that path and see what it was like. That's what's going on in the world today. Destruction after destruction after destruction. Verse 19, and I close, it said, all the ways of everyone that is greedy or gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof. This is a condemnation of the beginning of covetousness. Wanting what somebody else has got. And this is a chance to get it. That's what he's talking about here. We live in a materialistic age today. And he's right. We live in a materialistic age of things of what we can get our hands on. I had somebody tell me the other day, does stealing a pair of tennis shoes and a TV make all this go away? Well, no. It don't make nothing of it go away. You know. But it's just the destruction that's in our world. And all I can say that it's been driven by Satan. Solomon is saying, we'll get into his Sunday school lesson later on. Solomon is saying, I want you to take the path of wisdom through God. The book of Proverbs is a heck of a book for any young person to read and take to heart about life, because it pertains exactly not only what went then, but what's going on today as well. And we need to pray for our kids and pray that they do listen to the parents who's trying to help them take the right path. Let's pray. Father, we thank you, Lord, for your word. We thank you, Lord, for this book of Proverbs. Lord, there's more wisdom and more things to learn out of this book of the Bible and the things of life that you hardly ever find in the Bible about that, because Solomon, he found out in the latter part of his age that all this material stuff and all these things were nothing but vanity compared to God and what God had given him and what God had given him from the beginning. And he's trying his best through these scriptures to even not only his son, but let us today to understand that the path of righteousness is through God. The path of destruction is through Satan. Lord, I pray that we take these words and we take them to help other people to understand, Lord, that the right path they should take. That's his name.